Night shifts are naturally unsettling. The world is asleep, and you're left with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and your own thoughts. But for one warehouse worker in rural Ohio, the silence of the night shift was broken by something that shouldn't have been there. This is his story. Back in 2018, I worked as a night security guard for a massive distribution center. For an introvert like me, it was a dream job. I was paid $22 an hour. Just to sit in a little booth, check the occasional truck in, and do a walking perimeter sweep every 3 hours. The facility was huge, surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides. It felt like standing on the edge of the world, especially at 3 in the morning when the darkness was absolute. One Tuesday, around 2:15 a.m., I was doing my second round of the night. The warehouse was mostly automated, which meant there were huge sections where no humans were ever stationed. Just rows and rows of towering shelves reaching up into the darkness of the ceiling, a silent city of boxers. As I walked down aisle 42, a sound cut through the quiet and made my blood turn to ice. It was a soft rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It sounded exactly like fingernails on metal. I stopped dead in my tracks and shone my heavy-duty flashlight up into the racking. The beam cut through the thick dust motes dancing in the air, but I saw nothing. Just boxers of electronics and shrink-wrapped pallets. I tried to rationalize it. It was probably just the building settling, or maybe a stray bird had gotten trapped inside. I brushed it off and continued my patrol. I turned a corner, heading back toward the main office, when I saw it. At the very end of the long, empty hallway, near the emergency exit, there was a man. He was standing perfectly still, just facing the wall. What struck me as odd was that he was wearing a dirty, oversized yellow raincoat. It hadn't rained in weeks. My heart started pounding. "Hey, this facility is closed to the public," I shout. My voice echoed, sounding uncomfortably loud in the vast, empty space. The man didn't move. He didn't even flinch. It was like he hadn't heard me at all. I started walking toward him, my hand hovering over my radio, ready to call it in. The closer I got, the more unsettling the scene became. I realized he wasn't just facing the wall. He was whispering to it. It was a fast, low-pitched mumble, like he was reciting a long list of names over and over again. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said, my voice firmer this time. I was only about 10 feet away from him now. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The man tilted his head to the side, a movement so jagged and unnatural it looked like a glitch in a video game. He didn't turn his body around. Instead, he started to lean his torso backward, bending farther and farther than any human spine should allow, until he was looking at me completely upside down. His face was ghostly pale. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and he had this huge, static grin that looked like it had been carved onto his face. Time seemed to freeze. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I didn't even think to key my radio. I just bolted. I ran as fast as I could back to the security booth, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking as I frantically watched the monitors. I checked the camera for the emergency exit where I'd seen him. The hallway was empty. The door was still locked from the inside. There was no way he could have left that fast without tripping an alarm. It was impossible. I spent the rest of my shift glued to those screens, my eyes darting between the different camera feeds, expecting to see him at any moment. Around 5 a.m., just as the first hint of sunlight was starting to break on the horizon, I saw something on the monitor that still haunts me to this day. It was the camera overlooking the roof of my own security booth. A hand, long, pale, and ending in jagged, dirty nails, reached down from the ledge above and tapped on my window. Tap, tap, tap. I quit the next day. I don't work nights anymore, and I never, ever buy anything that ships from that distribution center. Thanks for listening. If you have a story of your own, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more strange dailies from the dark side of the everyday world.
There's a specific kind of dread that comes with being home alone during a storm. The thunder masks noises that would otherwise alert you to danger. For a college student named Sarah, a weekend of house-sitting in the mountains turned into a desperate game of hide-and-seek with someone who refused to stay outside. This happened about 3 years ago. I was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle who live in a very wealthy but very isolated part of the Appalachian Mountains. Their house is beautiful, mostly glass and wood, but it sits on about 10 acres of thick forest. The nearest neighbor is a half-mile hike away. The property also has a small guest house about 50 yards behind the main building. It's a tiny, one-room cabin used for storage or the occasional visitor. On the second night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in. The wind was so strong it felt like the glass walls were bowing inward. Around 11:30 at night, the power flickered and then died completely. I was sitting in the living room with only a few candles when I looked out toward the backyard. Through the sheets of rain, I saw a light. It was coming from the guest house. A faint, flickering orange glow, like someone had lit a fire in the small wood stove inside. My heart skipped a beat. My aunt had told me the guest house was locked and empty. I grabbed a raincoat and a heavy flashlight, thinking maybe a hiker had broken in to escape the storm. I didn't want to be that person who calls the police over a shivering hiker, so I decided to check it out myself. Huge mistake. As I trekked through the mud, the wind was screaming. I reached the guest house door and noticed it was slightly ajar. The lock had been snapped off. I pushed the door open, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The room was empty, but the wood stove was roaring with fire. The weirdest part, there were clothes laid out on the small cot in the corner. A pair of jeans, a flannel shirt, and boots, all neatly arranged as if a person were invisible and lying there. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the rain. I turned to leave when I saw it on the floor. A Polaroid photo. I picked it up. It was a photo of me. But it wasn't from that night. It was a photo of me sleeping on the couch in the main house, taken through the glass wall. The timestamp on the bottom was from only 2 hours ago. I dropped the photo and sprinted back to the main house. My boots were slipping in the mud, and I felt like eyes were on my back the whole way. I got inside, locked the heavy deadbolt, and pushed a chair against the door. I sat in the dark kitchen, clutching a knife, staring at the backyard. That's when the lightning flashed. In that split second of white light, I saw him. A man was standing right outside the glass door, his face pressed against the pane. He wasn't trying to get in. He was just watching. He was wearing my uncle's old hunting jacket. In his hand, he held a small, silver camera. The power suddenly hissed back on. The porch lights flooded the deck. He was gone. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the woods and found a nest in the crawlspace under the main house. It was filled with food wrappers, blankets, and dozens of Polaroids of me walking the dog, eating dinner, even one of me looking out the window toward the guest house earlier that night. They never found the man. My aunt sold the house 6 months later. To this day, I can't stay in a room with large windows at night without closing every single curtain. Thanks for watching. If you have a story like this you want to share, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more strange and chilling tales. Stay safe out there.
Our final story tonight is the longest and perhaps the most disturbing. It comes from a hiker who spent a week in the deep wilderness of a national park. We often fear predators, like bears or wolves, when we go into the woods. But this story reminds us that the most dangerous thing in the forest is often another human being. This happened in the summer of 2021. I'm an experienced backpacker, and I've spent countless nights alone in the wild. I actually prefer the solitude. I chose a trail in a remote section of a national park that isn't popular with tourists. I wanted a week of total silence. For the first 3 days, it was perfect. But on the fourth night, the silence changed. It became heavy. I had set up my tent in a small clearing near a creek. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sound that shouldn't exist miles from civilization. It was the sound of a zipper. At first, I thought it was my own tent, but I realized the sound was coming from outside. I sat up, frozen, holding my breath. Then I heard a voice. It was a low, raspy whisper, barely audible over the bubbling creek. Not this one. This one is awake. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise. I grabbed my bear spray and my knife. I waited for hours, but no one came inside. When the sun finally rose, I crawled out of my tent, expecting to see footprints. Instead, I found something much worse. Around my tent, someone had placed a circle of small, hand-carved wooden dolls. They were crude, faceless, and each one was tied with a lock of what looked like human hair. I didn't stay to investigate. I packed my gear in record time and decided to hike back to the trailhead, which was a 2-day journey. I felt like I was being watched every second. By dusk, I was exhausted. I found a rocky ledge to camp on, thinking it would be harder for someone to sneak up on me. I didn't set up the tent this time. I just lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the tree line with my flashlight ready. Around midnight, I saw a flicker of light about 200 yards away. Someone was out there, moving through the trees with a red headlamp. Red light is used by hunters and hikers because it doesn't ruin your night vision. The light was moving in a jagged, erratic pattern. Then it stopped. It stayed fixed on my position for 10 minutes. I realized then that I wasn't being followed by a hiker. I was being hunted. I left my heavy pack behind, taking only my essentials, and started moving through the dark. I didn't use my light. I navigated by the moonlight, tripping over roots and scratching my face on branches. After an hour of frantic hiking, I reached an old fire lookout tower. It was abandoned, but the heavy steel door at the base was rusted shut. I managed to squeeze through a broken window and climbed the stairs to the top. I thought I was safe, but then I heard the sound of boots on the metal stairs. Clang, 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 slow and deliberate. I hid in a corner of the lookout room. The footsteps reached the top. The door creaked open. I could smell him before I saw him, a scent of rotted meat and wet earth. The man didn't have a light anymore. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the moon. He began to hum a lullaby. It was "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," but the melody was distorted, sliding off key in a way that made my skin crawl. "I can hear your heart, little bird," he whispered. He started walking around the room, dragging a metal tool, maybe a hatchet, against the floorboards. Screech. He was playing with me. He knew I was there. Just as he reached the corner where I was hiding, a loud crack echoed from the forest below. A large branch had fallen, or maybe a bear had moved. The man stopped. He turned his head toward the window, hissed like an animal, and then bolted out the door and down the stairs with terrifying speed. I stayed in that tower until midday, paralyzed by fear. When I finally made it to my car, I drove straight to the ranger station. The rangers searched the area. They found my abandoned backpack. It had been sliced open, and every piece of my clothing had been neatly folded and placed in a pile, except for my socks and underwear, which were missing. They also found a shack 3 miles from the tower. Inside, they found dozens of IDs belonging to hikers who had gone missing in that park over the last 20 years. I never went back to the woods. Sometimes, when it's very quiet at night in my suburban house, I think I can hear that distorted lullaby being hummed right outside my bedroom window